All right, hi everyone. Hi, how are you? Great. Awesome. Well, my name is Melissa Carrier, and I'm the Assistant Dean of Global Programs and the Executive Director of the Center for Social Value Creation at University of Maryland. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this panel, Social Entrepreneurship Ain't for the Faint of Heart. First, before we get started, we want to get a sense for who's in the room before I unleash this panel on you. Raise your hand if you are a current student studying social entrepreneurship. Okay. Raise them high too so we can see. And raise your hand if you are a faculty who teaches social entrepreneurship. Okay. And raise your hand if you are a social entrepreneur yourself, whether you are currently one, working to be one. Okay. Great, good, nice mix. Did I miss anybody? Erin, you are a social entrepreneur. I'll answer that one for you. So a few months ago when Ashoka was planning the exchange, I brainstormed with the team, with Erin and Marina, about a potential idea I had for this panel. I teach social entrepreneurship at the University of Maryland, and like many of you that also teach, we have a number of courses, we do lectures, we do action learning, we have events, we bring in speakers, but it felt like something was missing. And so we wanted to do a panel to really talk about what is it about social entrepreneurship that makes this such an interesting and challenging career choice for so many people, and what happens once they leave campus and we unleash them to the rest of the world. And so there was no better person to moderate this panel than my friend Alan Weber. For those of you that don't know, Alan is an award-winning journalist. He is co-founder of FastCompany. He was managing editor of Harvard Business Review. And I think really his most important fame to claim is that he is a board member of the Center for Social Value Creation at University of Maryland. By far, his most outstanding accomplishment yet. And so I'm delighted to have Alan here. I met Alan in 2009. He had just published a book called The 52 Rules of Thumb. And he came to speak at the launch of the Center for Social Value Creation in Washington, D.C. And what amazed me so much about Alan was he was able to moderate a panel with 3 tenured faculty from the University of Maryland and keep it witty, brilliant, smart, funny, and interesting. And I thought, this is a guy I have to get to know. I was really impressed. Alan really describes himself as a global detective, and I think that's very true. He has one of the best jobs in the world, I think. He gets to go around and meet industry business leaders, entrepreneurs, and really observe their behaviors, and then he gets to write about it. And I think that's pretty cool. So one of his rules in his book, 52 Rules of Thumb, is knowing it ain't the same as doing it. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. So we have a wonderful panel with Katherine and Mike and Alan. I'm going to turn over to Alan to facilitate this conversation. And if you could just join me in welcoming them.
Thank you very much. That was way too long. This is a really good, small, tight group. This is not a panel, this is a conversation. If you have a cell phone on you, if you could set it to stun right now, so in the middle of something that Michael is saying, it doesn't ring, that would be good. What we're going to do is have a chat with my 2 friends up here, and then as soon as we can, we're going to open it up for a broader conversation about what's on your mind, questions that you have that they might be able to address specifically. I kind of think of this as the moderator. I think of this as the grumpy old man panel. We're going to ask hard questions. I think we're going to try to be brutally honest about social entrepreneurship in the world today. Where is it? What works? What doesn't work? What are the convenient stories we tell each other that aren't exactly true? And so when it comes time to ask questions, don't hold back. Nothing is off limits, I think. There's a very smart and truth-speaking group of folks up here. So let me, with that as the preamble, just introduce my friends up here. My friend Katherine Fulton. is somebody who 16 or so years ago I tried to hire at FastCompany magazine. She was coming out of a career as an award-winning journalist and entrepreneur in North Carolina. I offered her a job at FastCompany, and she promptly went to work in San Francisco for Monitor, starting the Monitor Institute. And for the last 15 years, I would guess, roughly, Katherine has distinguished herself around the world as a student of what works with social entrepreneurship, philanthropy, how change is changing, how to take advantage of the blend of skills and capabilities that make the difference between success and failure in the world of creating change and being a change maker. And I have nothing but the utmost respect for Katherine's experience and breadth of knowledge, and I only wish she'd taken the job that I offered. Mike Del Ponte is a friend of about 5 years, 6 years. I met Michael in San Francisco, where he lives now. At the time, he had recently graduated from divinity school. There was a 2010 article in a well-regarded magazine called FastCompany entitled How Mike Del Ponte Found His Calling, and how Mike had decided to start an organization called SparkSeed. It was going to teach social entrepreneurship in colleges and become the kind of light to teach that. It was ultimately SparkSeed was acquired. Mike left that after a while and helped grow a career networking site, for-profit, kind of a Facebook enterprise. And now is the CEO and founder of something called Soma, which is the social entrepreneurial competitor to Brita water filters. And it's got a very, very both specific new launch strategy and then a very large platform it's trying to create. So Mike is somebody who's had a lot of experience advising social entrepreneurs, being a social entrepreneur, failing miserably as a social entrepreneur. No, he didn't. And is a real witness to what works and what doesn't work. So that's who these folks are. They're really very, very smart and grounded, and so again, all questions are good questions. So let me start, Katherine. I gave you a brief, my version of your bio, but we all saw last night at the TEDx talks. Everybody's got a story. Give us a little bit of the Katherine Fulton story.
So just a few things that are relevant to the conversation. So I have started 2 mission-driven businesses in the last 30 years. And so they were both kind of hybrids of being purpose-driven, but actually choosing the business form as opposed to a nonprofit form. The first one I started when I was 27 in North Carolina with some other people. It was an alternative newspaper. I'm happy to say it's still alive, although it was just sold after 30 years. And I learned everything. I learned a huge amount about business. I was in that business for 10 years. Then went on and lived for another 20 that I wasn't involved in it. That was quite formative, an amazing formative experience. And importantly, I got a bunch of training before I did that. So that's actually, we're talking about skills and sort of when's the right timing. I had developed a bunch of ideas before I made the leap into an enterprise that we were starting from scratch. I do think of entrepreneurship in the kind of classic definition of sort of organizing resources that you don't control, right? Of all kinds, money and talent and networks and customers and all sorts of things. I'm now 8 or 9 years into the next of the enterprises that I built from scratch. This one was more entrepreneurship in that it was a mission-driven social enterprise hosted by a professional service firm. So it's sort of even hard to imagine what that is. What it means is that I've been running the social change practice of a major global consulting firm that's purpose was not to make money. Its purpose was to help the firm use its resources to create change in the world. That firm, Monitor, was just bought 6 weeks ago by Deloitte. which is the largest privately held professional service company in the world. I'm now part of an organization with 200,000 people and $30 billion of revenue. I have absolutely no clue what that's going to mean, but I'm living definitely the disruption of that at the moment. Now, in the time that I have been working at Monitor Institute, the important thing here is that I've had a chance to work with innovative leaders in businesses and who are social entrepreneurs. I've worked with a number of social entrepreneurs personally as an advisor in helping them in their businesses. And then I've done an awful lot of work with the funders of social entrepreneurs. So I do most of my work actually is with funders. The Monitor Institute and Monitor partnered with FastCompany post Mr. Weber's time to run something for 5 years, which was called the Social Capitalist Awards. And we actually ran a competition in which we took applications and looked at a panel and chose each year 25 social entrepreneurs, when social entrepreneurship was at a kind of different stage of its development than it is now. And Monitor is also, for the last almost 15 years, partnered with New Profit, which is one of the venture philanthropy funds that has funded and helped to grow many of this country's great social entrepreneurs. For instance, Teach for America was a small organization when it was first funded by New Profit, and I think Monitor did something like 6 or 8 projects to help them scale, right? So the perspective that I offer is 2 startups that I've done myself, and many years of trying to walk side by side with people doing this amazing, energizing, and extremely hard thing of making magic happen.
Great. And Michael, I probably didn't tell your story quite right, but why don't you give us a quick autobiographical sketch of your journey?
Sure. Yeah, so for me, I believe the most important thing that human beings can do is find their calling. And so from a very young age, I was always asking myself, what am I put on earth to do? And I grew up in the Bay Area near San Francisco, went to school in Boston. And when I was at Boston College, one of the professors there said, if you want to find your vocation, you need to ask 3 questions. What am I best at? What brings me joy? And what does the world need? And so from that time, being a freshman at college until probably the last day of my life, I'll be asking those questions. And while I was at college, I got very much into social entrepreneurship, activism, volunteerism, in my own faith. And I started trying to find my vocation. So I was a microfinance consultant in Nepal. I helped build a child healthcare program in India. I did some peacekeeping work in the West Bank. And I ended up at divinity school, as Alan mentioned, to consider becoming a Catholic priest. And while I was there, I was meeting all these young, really passionate, amazing college students who wanted to change the world, but they didn't have many resources. And just like when I was in college, I didn't know funders, I didn't know how to run a business, I didn't have a large network or a lot of work experience. And so I realized that if there was an opportunity, I might be able to help some of these young, aspiring social entrepreneurs launch social ventures. So we created a nonprofit organization called SparkSeed, and we ended up helping to boost some of these early stage social ventures around the world in Mali, in China, in the United States, in South America. And it was kind of like a nonprofit venture capital or accelerator model very early on in kind of the social entrepreneurship and accelerator space. And what we aimed to do was to take great ideas, passion, really talented teams, and give them what they needed to get their ideas off the ground. So we ran that for a few years, and it was, on the one hand, found to be quite a success. On the other hand, we ended up merging with another nonprofit organization, and SparkSeed, as of today, is pretty much non-operational, and I'm no longer involved in it. So I can talk a little bit about what worked and what didn't work. After SparkSeed, actually about the time when we were considering this merger, I was thinking, how can I have the greatest impact? Going back to those 3 questions, what am I put on earth to do? And I wanted to learn more about becoming a great CEO. And I was also living in Silicon Valley, so I was seeing all of my friends in tech live a very certain type of life and grow their businesses in a very certain way. And then I was also in the social entrepreneurship world and watching my social entrepreneur friends do it. Both of them were doing these startups, one had a huge impact, needed funding, but doing it in a very different manner. So I decided to go into tech, help grow a business from 0 to 25 million users in 16 months. raised $49 million in venture capital. And then after about a year, I got the idea for Soma. The easiest way to understand Soma is it's kind of like Method meets Tom's meets Brita. So our first product is a high-end competitor to Brita water pitchers. It's a beautiful glass craft made in Germany, the world's first compostable water filter. We send it out to our customers every 2 months as a subscription in the mail, so it's like getting a gift in the mail, so you never forget to change the filter. And there's also this charitable component which we're announcing this summer. So we've been running this business for about 12 months. We did a pilot launch in December. It was one of the fastest growing fleets on the internet at that time. We ended up getting about 2,000 customers in 2 weeks. And now we're back in product development, and we're planning to launch it this summer with our charitable partner.
And if people want to read your blog on how to gain Kickstarter, how do they find it?
Yeah, you can Google Hacking Kickstarter. We wrote a post on Tim Ferriss's blog about how to take all the lessons we learned from the tech world and viral marketing and apply it to product launches, specifically on crowdfunding sites.
Okay, so that's who these folks are, and I think we
Yin and yang.
could not have done any better. I think these are the best folks for this conversation ever invented.
Can you center your mic? It's making
And if you would just center your mic, it would be perfect. So, all right, so the first question I want to ask is for you, Michael.
Sure.
And that is,
That better?
does that work? Yep, okay. So
A little bit better, not the best?
perfect.
Perfect, thank you very much.
This is fail early to succeed sooner in microphone lore. So Michael, I want to get at the question of failure and the death of social entrepreneurial startups. The people come to events like this and they leave inspired, and I think that's important. But the flip of that is that the truth is that it's really hard to do a social entrepreneurial startup, and they fail a lot. Any startup fails a lot. Social entrepreneurial startups fail a lot. If you were to look at the death certificates of social entrepreneurial startups, and you read the line where the postmortem says cause of death, what would we most likely find on those death certificates? Are there one or two or some number of more frequent causes of death that people need to be aware of?
Yeah. So the short answer to that, I believe the number one cause of death of all startups, but also social ventures, is the inability to find a proven business model before you run out of money. And so I can speak to the death of Sparkseed, but also having helped launch all of these social ventures and seeing which ones succeeded and which ones failed. It was very clear. The ones that were able to create a proven and reliable business model are now thriving. So when I started Sparkseed, it was 2007, 2008, and there was another organization that was just popping up as well called the Unreasonable Institute, which many of you probably know, run by some of my friends, Dan Teju and that gang over in Boulder, Colorado. So Sparkseed and the Unreasonable Institute were founded around the same time, grew around the same time, but Unreasonable Institute was able to build a really incredible business model. Unreasonable Institute is like an accelerator for young social entrepreneurs, similar to Sparkseed, but they actually incubate them in Boulder, Colorado for a certain amount of time. But they came up with some really innovative business models. So not only were they getting some funding as a nonprofit organization, but they had this whole marketplace where their participants, their social entrepreneurs, would actually fundraise and pay to come and do the experience. They found a business model, and they ended up thriving. Sparkseed's business model was nonprofit. Go out and ask people for money. That can be a good, reliable business model for some organizations. Teach for America is a thriving nonprofit, and that's a great business model for them. For us, it wasn't a great fit, and I think one of the issues with social entrepreneurs is that's the business model of choice. And oftentimes their focus on solving their social problem really important, but they fail to find a proven business model that will actually support their organization and help it grow.
Okay. We'll come back to that. Katherine, your turn. When you look at across the landscape of social entrepreneurship, what's the cause of death?
Well, actually the first question is how you think about the landscape of social entrepreneurship, because I totally agree with what you just said, especially for a particular type of enterprises, right? And so we just supposed to think about enterprises. I really think that the energy of social entrepreneurship and the act of entrepreneurship applies across a broader range. But so if I were to ask, why is it that people fail, and why is it that they don't find their business model to start? I was thinking, Alan asked us this question, so I had fun thinking about a couple of things. If there was a kind of epitaph for somebody, one of the things might be, it was all about me. And by that I mean, when I look at, if I think about my own experience, and I think about, I think it took me about 10 years, I thought, I learned everything there was to learn that you could do through force of will. And in the next 10 years, I learned all the things you couldn't do through force of will. And I think the thing that's hardest, for especially young people, social entrepreneurship is a expression of values. It's a self-expression. And the hardest thing to learn is that you will succeed and fail entirely by the degree to which you inspire others. Every great social entrepreneurship real organization I know is a really good organization surrounded by a great community, of which this one is a really good example. I asked Bill Drayton earlier to give me how many people worked for Ashoka and what was the budget of Ashoka. And 10 minutes later, he barely got to answering the question because, of course, what's Ashoka? Where would you put the boundary around Ashoka? Fellows, their budgets, the universities, the whole thing. So it's not about me. It was all about me.
So death by narcissism.
Death by not understanding enough about that it's not about you, right? Yeah. And then there was a second one. Do you want me to do it?
Yeah, go ahead.
My other thing that this would be actually on the death certificate, not the epitaph. Died from a lethal combination of arrogance and ignorance. And by that I mean, as opposed to when I see really great leaders who succeed over a long period of time, it's because they have a superb combination of humility and curiosity. The waste, the death, to me, the failure isn't just the death, it's the waste of time, energy, and resource, right? It takes too long because people are not learning enough from other people's mistakes and as fast as they can. I know that was a mistake that I made early on. How is it that knowing isn't the same as doing? How actually can we get ourselves to know things from other people's experience? But there's there's something that happens. The quality that the chutzpah just to be an entrepreneur actually requires a bit of arrogance, I think. And then, so how could you combine that with the qualities of openness, of curiosity that enable you to learn faster from other people's mistakes, so make new mistakes?
Mike, I want to go back to what you said about the lack of business knowledge, or I think you said to me earlier, too much social, not enough entrepreneur in the mix. Kind of unpack that a little bit more. Why is that the case? Was that the way it was for you when you got started? You were so focused on being a person who was going to change the world, you forgot you needed to be able to run a business? Do we not teach the right things? Mm-hmm. Well, where's the gap?
Yeah, so I've had a pretty interesting opportunity to be in Silicon Valley and to be watching how tech companies grow and compare that to how a lot of social ventures grow and the different methodologies. So if you go to Silicon Valley, there's lean startup, there's agile development. There are all these ways that tech entrepreneurs think based off of different institutions and publications, whether it's Y Combinator, TechCrunch, or lean startup. And then there's a whole set of those things for social entrepreneurs, and they're very different. And I think that there is too much social and not enough entrepreneurship. And when I say business model, what I mean is ways of reliably making money. So money is the lifeblood of any organization, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're a university, whether you're a for-profit. And I think that there has been a lack of focus on creating business models. And the one thing that I think I disagree with you on about this on Katherine is that there can be inspiring leaders what you described about the importance of inspiration is about leadership, and I completely 100% agree with that. That's the secondary lifeblood, I suppose, is keeping people inspired. But there are many inspiring people who have started a variety of businesses. Some succeed, some fail. And the ones that fail often haven't proven out their business model by the time that they run out of money. I mean, if you look at Virgin, that's a great example. Richard Branson, inspiring leader, 400 companies, some work, some don't. The ones that don't are the ones that aren't able to solve customers' problems to the extent that customers repeatedly pull out their wallet and give money. And so when we were thinking about what to do with SparkSeed, and we ended up merging with a really cool nonprofit organization, we created a curriculum, and it was everything that I had learned based off of all the social ventures we had interacted with, the successes, the failures, as well as everything I had learned in the tech community and bringing these ideas of lean startup. And we made a curriculum, and the focus was, can you get out there and test your idea and see if your solution is actually solving a problem to the extent that people pay you for that. And if people can learn how to do that, I believe that you'll have many more successful and impactful social ventures.
Well, so, I mean, so this is, I agree with that, and you're talking about business, right? So, and you're talking about businesses at a certain level of maturity. So, Monitor did a study with Acumen, it was published in the last year or so, really looking at when you're actually trying to innovate something where the problem is so deep and so hard that you have to actually invent a whole bunch of things around it. It isn't just the business. You actually have to invent the supply chain, in the developing world. So one of the things that's been learned is that you have to do a bunch more things from lots of different kinds of capital. So if you're assuming your capital would run out, you have to get your business model exactly right. But if it's a hybrid or if it's a nonprofit, you may actually have the ability to keep raising money as you are learning and modifying the model. So I really think this is radically both and it has to do with what type of problem you're solving, where you're solving it, to what degree the business is actually understood or is being invented from scratch. Our friends in Silicon Valley, also in San Francisco, panel up here, know a tremendous amount about how to grow and scale enterprises, but not everything that applies to a technology startup can apply to the full range of social enterprise.
Well, the thing, you said something to me the other day when we were talking about this, so maybe you can reflect on it quickly and see what you think of it now, because it strikes me that another issue is how social entrepreneurship and the field, which you spoke about earlier today, that's a constantly changing game. It's an evolving story.
Yeah.
And you said to me the other day that in the old days, and maybe to some extent today too, there were two ways to grow your project. One was to treat it as a business, and the other was to get government funding, or the equivalent of government funding. It could be philanthropic funding, where philanthropy steps in. But others will create this successful solution, and then the government will step in, a government, state, local, federal, and adopt it, and then it becomes funded through public dollars. That's the funding through public dollars seems less likely today than ever before, so that's a changing game. You said you have a lot of relationships with philanthropies. Are they looking at funding differently so that more importantly than ever, people have to think the way Mike is describing as an enterprise that has to have a business model, a customer, a revenue stream, profitability to survive? Or are there still two ways to grow your social and entrepreneurial startup?
Well, I mean, again, it depends entirely on what domain you are funding in, and so what just the thing that I was referring to is that if you actually just look at how you scale, there's only two ways because it takes a lot of resources. And you have to do exactly what you're saying. You've got to have a business model. It has to has customers, and it's going to work because it scales that way. Or you've demonstrated something, and the government has to adopt it as a policy. Charter schools are funded. I mean, they get money from philanthropists, but they're funded because they have a funding stream from the public education system. If you go out today to, so I'll give you one of my favorite examples, is the, not so good for a room of young people, but the process of dying in America has been transformed in the last 40 years by hospice, which is an amazing, amazing thing. Hospice started as a small nonprofit. It was a network of nonprofits in the early 70s. It then was taken up by philanthropies who basically, over time, got it into the Medicare reimbursement system. Right? And so if you start a healthcare, 50% of healthcare in America is funded by the government. So that's not going to, the healthcare game these days is, can we slow the growth, not is it going to go away. So if you're starting a healthcare business or a nonprofit, you're actually going to look eventually about how you scale it into the regulatory system. Right? So it's not that it hasn't gone away entirely, and it depends on which type of thing you're funding. And then I think they're increasingly, what people are looking at in the funding world is these kind of very interesting hybrids, especially through life stages. So you might need philanthropy to take the risk that no business capital would ever take to do an unproven idea, in the developing world. I mean, this is what microfinance went through. And there's, I think, something like $500 million of philanthropic capital went into microfinance, and 30 years on, it's in the capital markets, right? So you might well have, it begins with philanthropy, it goes to discounted return rate, it goes to then market rate return rate. I think we're going to see more and more experiments with that, and experiments with pay for success that we're starting to see with social impact bonds, which again is government, it will be government funded money with real innovation in finance. And so I think it's going to be a really fluid time, and I think the premium on just what Mike is talking about, of developing real business skills, anything that can be a business and can succeed as a business ought to be. That's one of my principles, right? So, and I think that's a much larger domain for that than ever was, right? So I think the problem is when people go in with business with expectations of normal capital return in areas that are a problem because the markets have failed, in the past, and so it takes a lot of innovation and often a lot of patience to invent the model that's going to fix the problem that's been sitting there for decades.
So Mike, what else would you put on
What else does he disagree with? I like that.
What else is on a death certificate? So one thing is not enough, you don't have a business model, you don't have a customer, you don't have a cash flow, you don't have profits, you die.
So you mentioned fail fast. I think that's a really important principle. And one of the challenges is when you're focused on grants. For example, we started Starseed 100% nonprofit 501c3, which means essentially you can get grants and you can get donations. So you get that money, right? And then that gives you a little bit of lifeblood. You go chase that money, but the people who were giving me that money weren't my customers. They were my funders, they were patrons, whatever you want to call it. But the value of my programming wasn't fully correlated with the amount of money I was raising. And so what I really like about thinking about your social venture as a business is you have to go and solve the problem of the people who are giving you money to stay alive. I'll give you a really interesting example. So my girlfriend is an amazing designer in New York, and she's in the tech community there. And this weekend she's at a workshop. It's 72 hours, and they come up with a business. And instead of just creating a business plan or going and getting a grant to try it out for a year, they have 72 hours to basically understand their problem. So she's calling, she created an app so that teachers can speak to parents of ESL students, so parents who can't speak the same language as teachers. And so she's actually calling parents and teachers and finding out, is this a real business? And after 72 hours, she'll take all of her hypotheses and take all the data she's collected, and she'll make a decision as to, should I actually look into this? And if she wants to, then she'll probably bootstrap it for a while and work long hours and eat ramen. And then at one point, if she really thinks that this is a business, either start generating revenue or raise some venture capital or do both. But she will learn so much in a short amount of time because she's so focused on, is this a real business? Because I need to pay, to do this, that she'll figure that out really quickly, whereas I've seen a lot of my friends in the social space and the nonprofit space say, all right, I need to go raise some money. And then you get some money and you're kind of addicted to raising that money and you turn into a fundraising machine as opposed
to just upfront figuring out, are you really solving a problem?
Or a beggar, or a beggar. I
I,
want to know what your answer is.
I know you do, and you're just going to have to suffer. I was going to, when I first met Michael, we were down at the Ferry Building in San Francisco, and I said, what are you working on these days? And he said, I am spending enormously long hours competing for grant money from all the different places you go to become a fellow, or this or that, you know. And I remember you were so frustrated because all of your time, which is your most precious resource as an entrepreneur, was going toward filling out papers and guessing what would win the prize. And then you said you finished second and you won a computer.
Yeah, it was one of the social ventures that we were supporting, which is an amazing organization run by a really phenomenal entrepreneur who coincidentally now is in the tech space as opposed to the social space. But he actually was applying for a competition, it's now a well-known competition in the social innovation space, and I think at that year 1,300 people had applied, and he was in the top 3, so that's pretty darn good. And he had spent months on this, applications and grants and interviews, and he flew down to this ceremony. And I think he got second or third, right? The prize was like 50 grand or something like that, which by the way, is a small amount of money to be spending months of your life competing over $50,000. To me now in retrospect, that seems like ridiculous and not the best thing to be teaching young social entrepreneurs. He flies down there, he has this great idea, which was really successful and got a ton of money and was on CNN and all of that. But his prize for being the second best out of 1,300 was a computer by a company which is now going to go private. It's a company that makes computers that sounds like rhymes with like smell. Right, so he got a smell computer that was worth like $1,000. He probably already had a Mac at home, and he was like, cool, like what am I gonna do with this laptop? I've worked for 6 months to get this, and all I got was a computer. I don't know if that's how jaded he was, but I felt jaded. It's like, geez, and now he can go to Silicon Valley, he could raise $1 million like that with a good idea, as opposed to going through this rigmarole to get awards, grants, and
Chasing the wrong thing. And I would add, if you're asking, one of the things that you both have touched on without naming it is, if you're running a business plan as a business person, you assess the competition. Who's already doing this? It turns out, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong from your experience, Katherine, there are an enormously large number of startups that are replicating things that already exist. And so we kind of have the Department of Redundancy department, where it's exciting because it's my idea, but I didn't really check the landscape, and there are already X number of people already doing this, which you wouldn't do if you were really doing a business.
You know, that is the thing. If I think about the single, there are only a handful of things that have changed profoundly in the last 10 to 20 years. That's probably the most important one in the following sense. 20 years ago, if you were sitting here in this room and you had an idea, it would have taken you sometimes months to figure out who else was doing it, where in the country, you had to go to a college library, imagine that. You had to, what were the sources? You had to go find the foundation center, if you happened to be in a city that had to figure out what foundations might have funded, if you just take what people were doing to try to end homelessness in, say, 1990, right? It took a lot of money and a lot of effort to figure out what the best practice was, what the ideas were, who was doing what. I mean, what is it, like 24 hours now, or 48 hours? I mean, like anybody with a computer and curiosity and some smarts can figure out at least who to call on the phone. And that's huge. So the cycle time of innovation and the ability to fail fast and move is really, really quick, really quick. But if you think ahead though where this is going, the reason I love the combination of these experiences and generations, the thing I worry about this, let's make it a business model, like I just said, I think everything that should be in a business should be, right? I absolutely believe that. I started a business, right? I mean, I believe in that. So, but here's what I'm worried about. There's a whole bunch of problems in the world that can't be solved by businesses, and that will never be funded by a venture capitalist, right? So we have to look at a broader range. That's why I say this isn't but, it's both and. It's got to be both and. We've got to be doing both of these things, like using all the creativity we have in the world to solve the things that nobody who's trying to make money in the near term is going to go tackle, right? at the same time, anything that can take the creative use of capital should be. Right? And I think that's the world we're living in, because there really isn't going to be new government money. I think that's pretty clear.
I also think, you were very generous with us in quoting from rules of thumb. Another one of my rules that I've observed to be true, not because it's hypothetically true, but it's based on real experience, is the old categories in which we've grouped things don't match the way people live anymore. So the category of what's a business and what's a social enterprise and what's a government responsibility, those boundaries are blurred, if not overlapping and erased. I love to tell the story about the first people to help the stranded folks in New Orleans. As we all know, it wasn't FEMA. Brownie was not very effective. But Walmart was incredibly effective at getting help down there. General Motors knew where everybody was stranded because people in General Motors cars had OnStar, and they were hitting their OnStar button, and GM actually had better information than any government entity did. So I think we've got to really collapse or rethink the categories into which we dump solutions, and be much more willing to see that there are hybrids and overlaps and new categories emerging.
Michael, it sounds like your new business, you said you have a philanthropic partner, so your new business is doing that, right? I mean, it would be really cool to hear about that a little more.
It is, yeah, and I completely agree with what you're saying
About the variety of social, I guess, good organizations. There are a ton of nonprofits that should be nonprofits, and I support a lot of them. One of my favorites is Charity Water. And when I say business model, that doesn't mean you have to be for-profit. Charity Water is an incredible nonprofit organization that does water projects around the world. So they raise money and they work with partners on the ground in 20 countries. And they've given the gift of water, which is one of the most important things in the world, to millions of people. Their business model, though, didn't start out getting grants and large donations. It actually was getting people to give up their birthday and fundraise. So this year, I turned 30, and I emailed all my friends and I said, will you donate $30 or more to Charity Water, raise a few $1,000s, and that's their business model. And that's a great business.
It's a resource model, really. I mean, it's the model for sustainability, basically. How you're going to be sustainable in an ongoing way.
And what I like about some of these in particular is that the exchange of money for value is really clear. So in a business, it's very simple. If I'm selling apples and my apples are the best on the block, then people will give me the most money for it and I'll have this thriving apple empire. But a lot of times in nonprofits, the people who are funding it aren't necessarily related to the service or the product or the program, and therefore you're getting this asymmetric relationship to the value that you're putting out in the market and the resources that are coming in. That's not true for all nonprofits, but you need to focus on how you're getting those resources and how it's tied to the value that you're creating.
So let me see if we can quickly flip, and then I got one more round of questions, and then we're going to open it up. So be thinking about what you want to ask. It may be simply a matter of you saying, well, things that don't work, do the opposite. But if you were going to focus on a few things for either students or people who are teaching social entrepreneurship to avoid the death certificate problem, what would you put on the opposite side of the ledger? What have you seen that works?
Mm-hmm. So I think the title of this talk is something like Social Entrepreneurship Ain't for the Faint of Heart. And social entrepreneurship is hard. And there's a whole lot of stuff that you need in terms of your attitude, your ability to inspire people, as you had mentioned, your skill set. So as a leader and as a team, there are many things that you need to do to just be able to survive. There are also these more strategic things that you can do, especially in the early stage, failing fast, finding your business model, customer discovery, value exchange, fundraising and financing. All of those things are really, really important as well. In terms of social ventures in particular, if I were to look at all the social ventures that I've been part of or that I've helped, on the ones that were able to succeed, that the things I think for me that are really interesting is oftentimes, there are exceptions in the world, there's an idea that everyone, all the stakeholders find it to be valuable. There are exceptions. Dyson, vacuum, it took them like 5,000 times to find the right design, and then finally it succeeds. Okay, so there are some exceptions. But I can tell you from my own personal experience, when I was running Sparkseed, if I could go out and pitch a philanthropist to give me $10,000. That was really good. That put a big smile on my face. When we started this company, Soma, and just understanding the marketplace, the competitors, the problem, our solution, the design, the people involved with it, we had people that within just 10 minutes were offering us $250,000 because it was so clear what the solution, the problem solution, as we like to say. And so I think that that's the key thing, is starting with this idea, clear solution for a very big problem, and then there's all the other kind of internal stuff that you need in terms of inspiration, leadership, skill set, recruiting a great team that is important for making any organization thrive.
So some kind of clarity that says, here is the big idea. And if you can line that up with then the customer benefit, you've got some positive energy.
Yeah, and they say, it's easier to raise $1 million than it is to raise 10,000, and I think that's true. You need to have a huge, huge idea. If you look at what Elon Musk is doing, he's running SpaceX and Tesla at the same time, electric cars and rockets, two of the most insanely ambitious ideas in the world right now, and both of them are doing quite well, and who wouldn't want to get involved with those types of projects?
Okay, Katherine, what's on here's what works list.
Yeah, so from my own experience and from watching other people, if I had some new idea, it takes so many different skills and attributes to be successful. Right? When you think about, a corresponding thing to I love your list of the things that your professor told you about getting a calling. The other thing to do is get an experience as well, learn what you're good at and what you suck at. And how is it that you get really smart early, from the get-go, with having a partner? So in my case, I would say the few most extraordinary experiences of my life is when, in some cases it was luck, and in other cases it was by design, where you actually the question is, it's not about me, is like, it wouldn't have to be about you if you were doing it with somebody. So how could you be lucky enough to have somebody that has a mirror image set of skill sets to your own to start with, that you can hold each other accountable and keep each other honest? So it's keep each other humble. But no, I think, the really great experience I had was when I had an unbelievable partner. You had a great experience.
I think, again, from FastCompany experience, I can tell you, again, a lesson that I learned is that managing your emotional flow is a lot harder than managing your cash flow.
Yeah.
And when you're an entrepreneur, if you're just doing it alone, if you're at the bottom of the emotional well, you need somebody, a partner, a sounding board, to help say, try again tomorrow.
Yeah, well, why don't you jump one day and when the other one's down, and so that's one thing. I think the other thing that I would say, as I think about my experience, is there's some, the notion of resilience over time, how it is that you actually balance an incredible sense of impatience and urgency and, fail fast, just moving, with also understanding that it's a long game. Anything that's going to really have a powerful change is going to take a long time. And then how do you take care of yourself? How do you tap into, I'm so fascinated, I want to have an entirely different conversation about the fact that you went to the Betty School, and what your spiritual practice, honestly, what you have to do to tap into deep reserves of resilience. And I can tell you that what I've been through in the last 6 weeks, I've used everything I've ever known in my whole life. And my well is pretty low, right? It's just drawn right down. And you go through these moments in life. And so the combination of patience and impatience, and as I've said in this talks I give many times, one of my absolute favorite things is from futurist Paul Sappho, who grew up in with a long view out on the prairie, and his family went to a ranch. He said, never ever mistake a clear view for a short distance. Never mistake a clear view for a short distance. Right? That clear view of thing, but boy, it's not a short distance ever that I've seen.
This is one I will pitch in on, Katherine. I'm really struck by Michael's reminder that social entrepreneurship is at least 50% entrepreneurship. From my experience, before I got into journalism, I was in politics in Portland, Oregon, and working in the mayor's office. And I learned an enormous amount about business from politics. And a lot of what FastCompany was actually about was not about business. It was about how to think about running for office. I think every social entrepreneur is running for office. So in addition to having skills that you think of as being traditional business skills, I think you need political skills. And I don't mean by that you need to go visit the mayor and try to get money from the government. I mean you need to think like a political organizer. So one of the things we said at FastCompany was every great startup does four things. And this is what a great political campaign, think about the Obama campaign. You talk about what you're going to change. Why are you changing something in Brit that's better than what Brita has to offer? What's the change that makes you a better option? What are the connections you're making that don't exist today? You're connecting people to a different way of having water in their home, and then a different way to get water to people who don't have it. So you're making interesting connections between environmentalism and design and drinking water in your home and around the world. That's a connection that nobody else is making right now. Third thing is, what are the conversations you're going to start? Political campaigns and social entrepreneurship is all about changing the conversation from the status quo to something better. So you will know that Soma has succeeded if there's not only a change of dollars, but a change of how people talk about beverages in their home. And what does that mean for an environmental solution, a health solution, not having these things in the garbage dump? That's a conversation changer. And the last one is what Katherine just said. It's all about creating a community. FastCompany created a community. And that's what magazines do. If you think about what a magazine is, it's a community of people who share an interest. Social entrepreneurs created a community of people who share an interest and are inspired to do something about it. So I think those are political skills that obviously are also business skills. That's why these things overlap in ways that aren't quite so categorically separate as they used to be. But I think when you look at the success ratio of people who are some of our world-class social entrepreneurs, they are great politicians in the best sense of the word. So last question, then we'll open the floor. I wanted to ask you about not just what doesn't work and what does work, but what's next. I think we all feel that the world of social entrepreneurship is a constantly changing, evolving story. That 10 years ago it was about one thing, and 5 years ago when you were in the heart of Spark Seed it was about something else, and now it's moving again to a different topic, a different way of playing the game, a different emerging sensibility. I'm interested in a quick response, or a little bit of a response, not the longest response, but a capsule response of what's changing in the world of social entrepreneurship today, and what would you like to see change? If you could dictate the agenda for the conversation or the education on social entrepreneurship, how is it changing and how should it change?
On a big level, I think what's shifting and what's good and what should change is you have a lot of businesses that are just phenomenal businesses, great product, great brand, making a lot of money, cool company culture, that are also doing good. My favorite brands that can be considered social would be like Method Soap would be one, Warby Parker, the glasses company, would be another. And these are companies that are just cool. Forget the social stuff, they just have great products, great brands, and that's what we strive to do at Soma, is we don't compromise on anything. So yes, this is sustainable, it's the world's first compostable filter, but it doesn't mean it has to be ugly. It's beautiful and elegant. It's like getting a product from Apple. And the brand is fun, and you enjoy using the products, and you like to tell people, and there's social media. And so I think what's really great is more people are focused on just building really great companies with great products and great brands, but they're baking in the social and environmental piece. And I find that really encouraging. That's how we look at running Soma. The second thing I want to say, though, that I really would hope is part of the conversation is that the most important thing for each individual is that they find their specific home. So one of the problems about pushing social entrepreneurship on campus is not everyone, actually most people are not called to be social entrepreneurs. And there can be a lot of pressure that you need to go out and you need to, be the next great social entrepreneur. That's not what you need to do. You need to be you. You need to be whoever you were put on earth to be. And that doesn't necessarily mean running anything. It just means being yourself. And finding out what gives you joy, what are you best at, and what does help the world, what the world needs, but who you are. And so I think that needs to be a big part, especially on college campuses when you're forming your life, that this needs to be a big part of the conversation, that everyone can contribute to social good, and you don't necessarily need to be a social entrepreneur.
Katherine?
Well, I agree with that. I worry about the hero culture of the social entrepreneur. So the only thing that's actually validated is being a leader. Actually, some people need to be part of organizations and need to follow, and actually need to follow doing the idea that's already been invented, right? I mean, so there's some of this, the redundancy thing that you were saying. And so the last thing we want to do is make people feel like the only way to be successful is to be a social entrepreneur, to be the social entrepreneur, the founder, this and that. And I think there is a romanticization of that if we kind of look, if we take that long view again, so what is it actually going to take to create a better world? One of the things I love about Ashoka is everybody a change maker, as we know, and there are lots of ways to be a change maker. The thing that I'm seeing, I'm seeing a lot of things from the work that I do, but the thing that's really interesting today is if you just listen to the language that's used, the language of ecology comes up, the ecology you work in and that sort of thing. So what you're getting is people looking at clusters of, so if I was an investor and if I was thinking about Soma, I'm going to run out and be a customer, I promise, as soon as I can. Get rid of that, rid of filter, and get my Soma filter, right? But I would want to think about, so what are the set of things it's going to take to move the needle on water, right? And to what degree is there light or organized coordination among players who share the same goal? So again, Ashoka's done some of that. Lots of people are trying to do it. People are trying to look at how you lift up whole sectors or whole industries or whole value chains, not just a single enterprise. It actually takes multiple organizations. And even more interesting, what I'm starting to see that I think is going to be really big in the years to come, and I hope is big, is people, what happens is the world is so complex and the expertise required to succeed is so great. You'll have the people who've been working in the field, for instance, of community development for the last 25 years or 30 years in this country, been working on low-income housing and all kinds of things, and it's just a huge, complex field in the United States. Over here, you have the people who work in public health, who are taking increasingly a social determinant of health view of what it's going to take to create healthy communities, which is, it isn't about the healthcare center, it's about the housing people live in and the schools they go to and the neighborhoods they live in. And what's happening is this incredibly exciting thing. These people are getting in a room together and sparks are flying. There have been 10 of these convenings on putting together community development and public health in the last 12 to 18 months. And they're realizing they're part of the same tribe. They're actually solving the same problem. And these silos of expertise, if we don't actually look, for instance, at the fact that the healthcare budget and the education budget are all part of the same budget, and we're never going to do what we need to do for kids if we don't actually solve the rising healthcare costs. Like, this is the kind of integrated look I think that's coming. It's very different than going out and doing your own enterprise. But what is your enterprise part of? What's the bigger story that is part of? Who is your tribe? that you are, you know, is your tribe, and being more and more creative about defining that.
Okay, who has a comment, question, reaction?